She had seen empty tip lines before. She had served rude customers, impatient businessmen, exhausted parents, and people who looked through her as if she were part of the furniture. She could survive a zero. What she could not understand was why the billionaire sitting at table 12 had stared at her with such a strange expression before leaving. And when Mara lifted his plate, she found something underneath it that made her heart stop. It was a small white envelope. Her name was written across the front in careful black handwriting. Mara stood frozen in the middle of the bright lunchtime dining room, surrounded by the clinking of silverware, quiet conversations, and sunlight pouring through the restaurant windows. She looked toward the glass doors, but the man was already gone. The envelope seemed impossibly heavy in her hand. Before we uncover what was inside that envelope, if you believe kindness can create second chances, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, leave a comment, and subscribe to Little Kindness Tales. Your support helps us bring more stories of compassion, courage, and unexpected second chances. Mara had arrived at the restaurant before sunrise that morning, even though the restaurant would not open for several hours. She was 32 years old and raising her 8-year-old daughter, Eliana, alone. Every morning began with the same race against time, preparing breakfast, packing a school lunch, checking homework, making sure Eliana's shoes were tied, and then rushing across town before the first customers arrived. Mara never complained about being a single mother. She loved her daughter more than anything in the world. But love did not make rent disappear. It did not lower grocery prices. It did not repair a broken washing machine or pay an unexpected school bill. For months, she had been carefully balancing every dollar between necessities, and lately that balance had begun to collapse. Her landlord had already given her a warning. Her old car had started making a frightening grinding sound. Eliana needed new school supplies, and Mara had been secretly skipping lunch at work so she could take home enough food for dinner. Still, every morning, she smiled. That day, the restaurant was unusually busy. Around noon, a black luxury sedan stopped outside the entrance. A tall man in his early 40s stepped out wearing a perfectly fitted navy suit. He had neatly combed dark hair, a calm expression, and the kind of presence that made people instinctively lower their voices when he walked past. His name was Adrian Vale. Everyone in the city seemed to know him. He was a billionaire entrepreneur who had built a technology company from almost nothing and had recently become one of the most influential businessmen in the region. Adrian was seated at table 12. Mara was assigned to him. She approached with a polite smile and handed him the menu. Throughout the meal, she noticed something unusual. He barely touched his phone. He barely looked at the menu. Instead, he watched the restaurant quietly, almost as though he were studying the people around him. Mara served his lunch carefully. She noticed that he was not demanding or rude. In fact, he thanked her each time she returned to the table. Yet there was sadness behind his eyes that she could not explain. When she brought the check, Adrian paid without hesitation. The total was several $100s. Mara thanked him and returned to the counter. A few minutes later, she noticed that he had left. She expected to see a generous tip. Instead, the receipt showed a large, unmistakable zero. For a moment, Mara simply stared at it. She swallowed the disappointment and folded the receipt. She told herself that it did not matter. A tip was never guaranteed. But as she cleared the table, she noticed that Adrian's plate felt strangely heavy when she lifted it. Underneath was the envelope. Her name was written on it. Mara looked around before opening it. Inside was a handwritten note. It explained that Adrian had been watching her throughout lunch, not because he was judging her, but because he had recognized something in her that he had not seen in years. The note mentioned the way she had quietly helped an elderly customer reach his dropped cane, the way she had given a thirsty child a glass of water before the parents asked, and the way she had smiled at a tired kitchen worker even though she herself looked exhausted. Then came the sentence that made Mara's eyes fill with tears. The note said that the $0 tip had been intentional because Adrian did not want to give her something that would disappear into the day's expenses. He wanted to give her something that could change her future. Beneath the note was a business card and a key. Mara did not understand. Then she turned the card over. On the back was an address. It was the address of a small building several blocks from her daughter's school. Adrian had purchased the building years earlier. According to the note, he had been planning to convert it into a community learning center, but the project had remained unfinished. He wanted Mara to meet him there. Mara immediately became suspicious. She had heard stories about wealthy people making strange offers. She had learned the hard way that desperate people could easily become targets for manipulation. So she did not go. Instead, she finished her shift and went home. That evening, she sat at the tiny kitchen table while Eliana worked on a school project beside her. Mara kept staring at the business card. Eliana noticed her mother's worried expression and asked what was wrong. Mara smiled and said that everything was fine. But later that night, after Eliana fell asleep, Mara opened the envelope again. There was another folded piece of paper she had missed. This time, it contained a simple message explaining that Adrian had no interest in charity that made people feel small. He wanted to offer Mara a job managing the community center. Not cleaning it. Not serving food. Managing it. He had learned that Mara had once studied early childhood education before becoming a waitress. She had left college when Eliana was born and had never been able to return. Adrian wanted her to build the center into the place she had once dreamed of creating. Mara still hesitated. The following afternoon, she went to the building. It was bright, spacious, and completely unfinished. Sunlight entered through enormous windows, illuminating empty rooms that could one day become classrooms, reading areas, and activity spaces. Adrian was waiting there. He explained that the center would provide free tutoring, meals, books, and after-school programs for children whose parents struggled to afford them. But there was a problem. The project needed someone who understood what struggling families actually needed. Someone who knew what it felt like to count every dollar. Someone who would never look down on a parent simply because they could not afford expensive opportunities for their children. That was why he had chosen Mara. Mara felt overwhelmed. She asked why a billionaire would trust a waitress. Adrian's answer was not about money. Years earlier, he had been raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs. She had once received help from a stranger when Adrian was a child, and that small act of kindness had changed the direction of his life. He had spent years trying to repay a debt that could never truly be repaid. Now he wanted to create opportunities for families like his own. Mara accepted the position. But she did not simply become an employee. She became the heart of the center. Over the next several months, Mara worked tirelessly. She designed reading programs, organized donated supplies, created affordable meal plans, and personally welcomed every child who entered the building. She remembered the children who were shy. She remembered the parents who were embarrassed to ask for help. She remembered what it felt like to need something and be afraid that asking for it would make you look weak. The center became successful. Then one afternoon, Mara received an unexpected phone call. Her daughter had been selected for a special academic program. Eliana had always loved science, but Mara had never imagined being able to afford the program's fees. The fees had already been covered. Mara immediately understood who had arranged it. She drove to the center and found Adrian standing outside. Instead of thanking him, she handed him an envelope. Inside was the first paycheck from her new position, along with a handwritten note. Mara had removed a portion of her salary and donated it back to the center. She explained that she did not want the center to become a place where people simply received help. She wanted it to become a place where people eventually had the strength to help others. Adrian smiled. For the first time since Mara had met him, he looked completely at peace. Years passed. The community center grew from one unfinished building into a network of programs serving hundreds of children. Mara eventually became its director. Eliana grew into a confident young student who never forgot where her opportunities had begun. And Adrian continued visiting the center, often arriving without an entourage, without cameras, and without announcing himself. One afternoon, Mara found the original envelope preserved inside a frame on the wall. The same envelope from table 12. The same one that had frightened her when she first discovered it under a plate. She smiled when she remembered the $0 tip. What had looked like rejection had actually been an invitation. What had seemed like indifference had been a test of trust. And what had appeared to be a billionaire's refusal to give had become the beginning of a life-changing act of generosity. Years later, when someone asked Mara what she had learned from that strange afternoon, she gave an answer that stayed with everyone who heard it. She said that sometimes kindness does not arrive in the form we expect. Sometimes it looks like an empty tip line. Sometimes it hides beneath something ordinary. And sometimes the person who appears to be giving you nothing is quietly opening a door you never knew existed. But Mara's greatest lesson was even simpler. Money can change someone's circumstances. Kindness can change what they believe is possible. And when those two things meet at the right moment, one small act can travel farther than anyone ever imagined. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes that people deserve second chances, and subscribe to Little Kindness Tales. Your engagement helps these stories reach more people who may need a reminder that goodness still exists.